Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall and this evening's Oregon Symphony Concert Conversations, a partnership between the Oregon Symphony and All Classical FM, your listener-supported station. I am the music director and weekday morning host for All Classical, John Pitman. Thank you for joining us tonight. And a warm round of applause for resident conductor Gregory Vajda of the Oregon Symphony.
Just walking down here, and I live on Park Block, so I walk to work, and I saw the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, and that reminded me to Thomas Lauderdale. He said that we should just name it the Arlene from now on, because it's just better to say, than so. I'm advertising this now. He probably should write a song on this, "Take Me to the Arlene" or something like that. But welcome to the Arlene.
Yeah, it's a lot easier, isn't it? Yeah. On the other hand, it seems like the Schnitz has stuck with a few people too, hasn't it? Yeah. Well, this evening, Gregory, we're having three pieces on a program from three different eras in classical music. The youngest of the three is a mere 102 years old, and that's I think the first piece on the program, the Webern Passacaglia, his Opus 1.
Yes, and as we know, naming your piece Opus 1 is dangerous, because then everybody's going to look at your Opus 1, when you came to your senses that now you're ready to name your piece Opus 1. And also
publish it. Yeah,
and publish it. Also, this is one of those pieces that are among the missing links in classical music. Missing link between the serialism, the 12-tone music, and the late romantic music. So it's basically somewhere in between what we know as Anton Weber now, from that very simple, very structured, very short pieces, and the world that he's coming from, this Mahlerian, late romantic, overheated, musical world that was on the turn of the last century.
Now, you mentioned Mahler, superheated, late romanticism. If one were to go find some recordings and find a piece that precedes this one called Im Sommerwind, or In the Summer Wind, that has kind of a rich, romantic, post-Mahler sound to it. But even when I was listening to the recording of this Passacaglia, which is a more spare piece, I can still hear traces of that legacy of late romanticism. And maybe it's because, despite its more modern sound, it's based on a very old musical form, the Passacaglia, that's regarded as one of the strictest of musical forms to write music to.
Well, this is a perfect example of how you can dance with your feet and arms, tied together. A later example of this is Wojciech by Berg, where he, for every scene in the opera, he predetermines a form, a rondo or a sonata form. So he kind of is remembering the forms from the past, and he manages to make it work with the drama of the opera. And something similar happens in this piece. It's very heated from time to time. It's very emotional. Some people say that it was somehow remembering his mother who just passed away. On the other hand, it's very structured, as you said. It's always the same number of bars. The harmonies are coming from the same line, and so it's like a building. But on the other hand, there are just moments where it just flows, and you don't think about the form anymore.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's a dissonant piece, but can you kind of give us what I like to call a roadmap to follow of the piece? Because it starts out just with, I guess the theme is actually stated by plucked strings. Is that right?
Well, it's basically just one line. So it gives you basically pitches, and it could go anywhere. But immediately after the number of notes run out, you hear a flute solo that's kind of like a counterpoint to what we heard in the strings before. So the pizzicato goes on, and the flute plays this beautiful romantic solo. There are about 3 main tempi in the piece, and that also structures the piece. And we always go towards climaxes, kind of like run into these fast, very expressive, very virtuosic moments, which I just call Tempo 108 because that's what's in the score. So there is no name to it like I Fell in Love, like we're going to talk about that, the piece in the second half. And then there's 66, the Tempo 66 I call it, which is probably the warmest, the most intimate. And then there's 55, which is a little bit like a thriller type of music. And I just got a very funny. I have my iPhone here. I don't know if you can see it. You know, it's 21st century. You gotta be connected to the world, right? I just got a video from one of the violinists in the orchestra, Ron Blessinger, just sent it to me an hour ago, and it's an Andy Griffith show, right? That show with the investigator. Is that it? Or am I missing?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So
Matlock, or
yes, yeah, the guy who later played Matlock, right? But this is the from the 50s, and somebody substituted the original soundtrack with the Webern piece. It works perfectly. You can find that on YouTube. Just go and look for soundtrack and Webern, and you'll find it.
That's very interesting.
And of course, you don't know it until you watch the whole thing, and then at the end, it tells you what the whole point is of making this.
Oh, well, you know, there's a new film out called Shutter Island that uses Krzysztof Penderecki and a lot of mid-century atonal music to great effect, I understand. Well, now, there's a little bit of a background on Webern I think is interesting. First of all, he was part of what I guess you could call a trilogy or a trifecta or something of these three composers, of which Arnold Schoenberg was essentially the teacher or the leader, as well as Berg. You mentioned his opera Wozzeck, and Webern completes the trio, and they are what is called the second Viennese school, because the Viennese school is the classicism of Mozart, which is where we'll be headed in the middle of the piece. But Webern had a very interesting path that he followed. You alluded to it earlier, where as time went on, he became very interested in both sound and silence, almost as though the silence was as important as the sounded notes. And that seemed to get greater and greater in concentration as time went on for the next couple of decades.
Well, this whole second Viennese school was about when Schoenberg first wrote a piece in the 12-tone system, which is basically nothing else, as we can learn it today from this piece, that just taking all the consequences that come from using all the notes you have on the palette, right? You have 12 notes, and you'll hear, I mean, there's nowhere to go from this style. You can't go more extreme. There is no way. It's just done. So you gotta go somewhere else, or gotta go further and say, well, now I'm gonna make the first democratic system in music history, and say that the 13th pitch is not allowed to come until the other 12 or the other 11 went by. So you never hear pitches being repeated, although later on, of course, it wasn't that. They were trying to loosen a little bit their own rules, but basically Schoenberg's intention was to invent something that'll give German music advantage in the next century. And that was coming from a Jewish person who had to flee Germany right after that. And Berg was the same, it was in the same situation. I find it kind of funny and sad that they were the revolutionary musicians of that era. And then, of course, they weren't... their pieces weren't allowed to be played, and so their music was banned basically later on.
Right. It was considered just very outside of what they wanted to hear at that time. Now, Mozart, the Viennese school of 18th century, there's kind of a spareness to the Piano Concerto number 23 in A major. I mean, he scaled back his instrumentation in this concerto. He normally loved to include oboes, sometimes trumpets and timpani, but this is a more intimate sounding piece. He eschews the oboe in favor of the darker hued clarinet. He's starting to get some some darker tones and colors in his music in this piece.
For those of you who read my bio, you know that I'm a clarinet player, so this piano concerto is close to my heart. There are no oboes, there are a pair of clarinets, one flute, and I did play the principal part of this with Murray Pariah playing the piano, actually, with the Francis Chamber Orchestra. So I did play this. There was no conductor, by the way. We just accompanied him as a chamber orchestra. Yes, I mean, the Köchel number is 488, so around this time, he kind of fell in love with the clarinet, and that always is related to meeting someone who plays it really well.
Yeah.
So he befriended a clarinet player, and then later on he started writing a basset horn concerto for him, which ended up being a clarinet concerto in A. And there are the serenades using sometimes 5 clarinets. There are serenades using 2 clarinets, 2 basset horns, which is also a type of clarinet. So he loved this sound.
Yeah. This is 1786. He's at the peak of his popularity, really. He's in Vienna trying to find a permanent post, hoping the emperor is going to say yes. And in the meantime, he's supporting himself by putting on subscription concerts. So there's this huge wealth of piano concertos over the span of about a 2-year period. And Concerto Number 23 is right in there. You may have heard the Concerto Number 21 with its lovely little second movement. This 22 is in E flat, and it's really big. And 23 is followed by Number 24 in C minor, which is the darkest of all the pieces. But we're right at Number 23, where he's starting to forge some new paths. He's getting away from writing pieces purely meant to dazzle the audience and please the ear. And he's getting deeper and more introspective, I think, in the Concerto Number 23.
Well, I just read an article recently because we like to remember Mozart. Then he was always in trouble, and he never had enough money, and he always had to work for peanuts just so he can make some money. And I just read an article that it wasn't entirely true. He made a lot of money and he spent a lot of money. Yeah. Good for him, I say. Yeah. But indeed, I think he was just finding himself as an established composer, despite the fact that he couldn't get a so-called good job with at a prince's court or wherever they could get jobs like that. But he was one of the pioneers, together with Haydn actually, who later on could make a living as a composer, as a freelance composer, because they were so popular that they could sell their music and make money on the concerts, basically. And so I think that he's over that period where he felt like he had to please, for example, the Parisian audience, like the Paris Symphony. I have to write a symphony that they like in Paris, so I just write 3 movements, and the first movement has to have a lot of scales running up and down in it, because that's what the French people like. So he's over that. And he's writing his own music now.
Yeah, and really in that context, you take away the desire to have a royal position. He actually was experiencing quite a bit of success and doing something that hadn't been done before. Now,
one thing is, like later instrumental pieces in his life, this piece is very operatic. It's very opera-like, especially the last movement. It does sound like the finales from his operas. This conversation between the different groups in the orchestra and the piano, and just the whole tone and the whole phrasing and the whole world of melodies that he's inventing. It's all just they just cry for singing.
He was writing The Marriage of Figaro at this time, which is a lot about those interplays and dialogues between the characters in that opera. So he reflects some of that love of his operatic writing in concertos like the A major. Yeah. How about Angela Hewitt? Have you worked with Angela Hewitt before?
Well, it's funny. I have. It was years ago, and she played a Bach piano concerto with no conductor. And they asked me to conduct the rest of the program. It was a 3 Bs. It was a Bach and a Beethoven and the Brahms. And it was with Pinka Zuckerman's orchestra, Arts Center Orchestra in Ottawa. So we met before, but we haven't really worked together before. And this is the first time, and it's just a great great fun.
It's great to have Angela back. She's a Portland favorite. She's been here to do piano recitals, and she's played with the Symphony a number of times. I remember hearing her do the Liszt Concerto No. 1. It was dazzling. She's also remembered quite memorably in that right after September 11, 2001, the attacks in New York, when flight was impossible, she made her way by car down here to perform in Portland. So she underwent a fair amount of difficulty, but made it to Portland to perform. That was great. You want to talk about the Berlioz that others superheated?
Do I? I don't know. I seem to be the Berlioz conductor this year because I did an overture. If you were here, if you remember when we did the Dutilleux Second Symphony, we ended with the Berlioz overture at the end. And I always wanted to. This is my first time doing Symphony Fantastique. Younger conductors got to go through that, and so this is the time for me to face this composition.
The trials.
The trial, yeah, the trial is on. And there, this orchestra played this piece 6 or 7 years ago. Carlos conducted it. So I decided that, since many of you were here and heard that, that we're going to do some things differently. For example, the second movement, which is this famous waltz, this ball music, there is a version with a piston in it, a valve trumpet, that was originally written by Berlioz, added to the score for a virtuoso trumpet player. And for some reason, and these are the mysterious ways of publishers, you don't want to go there, there's only one edition that includes this out of the 5 or 6 that exist. And there is a note, this very little music, the whole score is big, and then there's this little line with the trumpet. And there is a note that, well, Berlioz wrote this, but we don't suggest you to play this version. Okay, so I just decided that we are going to play this.
You were just tempted, you couldn't resist.
Exactly. It was so small that I had to discover it for myself. And of course, Jeff Work, our principal trumpet player, is a champion of these things. It's a really virtuoso. Valve trumpets were new. This type of valve trumpet, and he was probably, the composer himself was fascinated with this thing that you can use a trumpet like you're using a woodwind instrument. Mm-hmm. And indeed, this is what he's doing. It's going back and forth between playing scales and playing some little fanfares like a trumpet. But that's one of the experimental things, and this is a perfect piece to experiment with things. It's as Bernstein said it, I just read about it, this is the first psychedelic composition ever. I think that Austin Powers should include it in his next movie. But it's true. It's about an opium dream and a dream like a nightmarish ending to the whole story. So we are doing some other tricks in the Dies Irae movement, playing things an octave lower, and so adding it to it, cheesing it up. Can you say that in English? I don't know. It's a little cheesy, maybe, but it is a cheesy piece after all. And I just discovered that there is a sequel to this. Did you know about that?
Yes.
And I can never remember the name.
Lelio, The Return to Life.
Lelio, The Return to Life, which is a composition for an actor, narrator, and a choir, and an orchestra behind the curtain. Because the story of this is that in this piece, Symphonie Fantastique, he falls in love, and it kind of is haunting him, and there is no way to find a solution to this whole thing. So Berlioz, a year later, wrote a sequel to it, where we resolve all the problems, and guess how? That the hero of the piece gets to conduct his own piece with an orchestra. And that's the solution to everything. So apparently it was more popular than this piece, the sequel, because those times they loved these heroic Yes, and then I dreamt, da-da-da-da-dum. Then some music sounds, and then the timpanis are rumbling, and then there's a solution at the end, and there's beautiful music. And of course, it's connected to this piece with, through musical ideas. So I don't know, I probably need another 40, 50 years to program those two pieces together, because this is just such a great ending that I'm not sure that I want to play that in the second half.
Well, Berlioz, you mentioned the piston, the trumpet. I think this is a case of the right person arrives at the right time, because the instruments were being improved upon, so technology was a factor in that era. And he was really interested in creating large orchestras. He had a dream orchestra that was like 460 instrumental players, a choir of 360 people. He never achieved that, as I know, but he was known for
that's why they never play him in the United States, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But this piece is semi-autobiographical, because he was madly in love with this English actress named Harriet Smithson. And I mean crazy in love. I found a quote today that Berlioz, for him, it was more than just love. It was a force of nature that all but drove him out of his mind. He raved and he disappeared into the fields of outside Paris, and Liszt, Mendelssohn, and Chopin would have to go looking for him. He said that if she for one moment conceive all the poetry, all the infinity of a like love, she would fly to my arms, though she were to die through my embrace. So he's writing letters to Harriet Smithson. The interesting thing was, she had not even met him yet. He would go to the theater and see her perform Shakespeare, see her kiss the actor on stage, and go shrieking from the auditorium, because in his mind, they were a couple. They were madly in love. So when he goes to write the Symphony Fantastique, in a little way, it's kind of a revenge piece, because he starts out describing his dreams and passions in the first movement, and it really gets overblown. In the second movement, he's at a ball, he's at a dance, but he seems to just kind of see her at a distance. It's never real. It's always imagined.
And he's using this so-called idée fixe, which is basically nothing else than the leitmotif that Wagner was, working with. It's that the same musical material refers to the same person. So the music of the woman always comes back throughout the whole composition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this theme, and it's kind of an odd-sounding theme. It's not a warm, romantic, loving theme. It sounds a little twisted.
It's totally maniac, yeah.
So after the ball, the third movement is a scene in the country. And again, he's by himself. This is like Lord Byron traveling through Italy with these romantic ideas in his head. And he's just thinking about his beloved. There's a shepherd that calls from across the meadow on his flute. But then at some point, he starts to think, is that shepherd seeing her now? Is there something going on? He gets jealously enraged by this. A storm brews up, and it only seems to heat his passion even further.
He was one of the most experimental composers, not only of his times, but ever. So you'll hear an offstage oboe in this, when the two shepherds are playing the melody back and forth. It kind of like, again, comes back to Wagner in Tristan und Isolde, which is also about being madly in love and basically death and love in the same sentence. And that there is also the shepherd who plays the happy song and the sad song in the last act. So this is a little similar, and I cannot get rid of this thought of mine that he is a little bit, maybe, but don't tell anyone, making fun of Beethoven. Just a little bit, especially of Symphony No. 6. You'll hear this whole pastoral type of, and it's kind of like Beethoven's No. 6 or Symphony No. 4, kind of like blown up, like to these dimensions that are not even human anymore. But I think he is making fun, or he's just so fond of Beethoven that he's writing it in his own way. But I just can't. I had to tell you that, because I feel that so strongly, especially in this movement.
Well, I think he regarded Beethoven as his hero, his number one inspiration. He wasn't so interested in Mozart, the other composer on our program tonight. He just really latched on to Beethoven. He got to hear 2 symphonies by Beethoven in France. France was crazy about opera. They weren't very interested in instrumental music, but he realized the power of purely instrumental music. And 3 years after Beethoven dies, he writes this symphony, which is just groundbreaking. There had been nothing like it before. And so on to the 4th movement, where things really take a supernatural, bizarre turn. He dreams or thinks that he has murdered his beloved, and he's being sent to the scaffold to be executed. And that whole movement is just a march to the scaffold.
It's pretty scary. You always have to remember that these pieces were written before the times of TV. It feels like it was the Ice Age, right? No TV, no CD, no movies, no amplification, nothing. So the biggest sound you can get was in a concert hall. You went there. That's why he was probably dreaming about an orchestra, or Mahler was writing later the Symphony of the Thousands. You know, just more and more and more and more people playing this big, massive sound. So just imagine how effective it must have been back then, when this was the only way of producing this sound.
Mm-hmm. And so on to the final movement. He's been executed, or he thinks he has. And now in the final movement, he thinks that he's in the nether regions, in the underworld, and he's witness to this bizarre kind of orgy, this celebration going on between witches and goblins and ghosts and skeletons and demons and sorcerers.
And the love theme turns into just this grotesque dance at the end. So that's why I probably would never play the sequel of this, because I think that's just the perfect ending. Oh, by the way, they got married with this actress. We didn't finish the story. And they were happily married for about 5 years, and then they got a divorce. So be careful what you wish for, right? And what you write a whole symphony for, to just find this woman and then not be happy with her after a while.
I guess she turned out not to be quite the ideal love that he had imagined all that time. So great disappointment there in real life.
So this is one of those examples when the composition is wiser than the composer himself, right?
It's great stuff. How about some of the other instruments? I'm seeing the name Ophicleide in my head. What is that?
Yeah,
that doesn't grace the stage very often.
No, and we're not really playing it on Ophicleide either. Ophicleide was one of those hybrid instruments, a brass instrument with a wooden mouthpiece, and there were other versions. The serpent was also a mix of wood and metal, and they didn't really work out well. But it's a type of a tuba type of instrument. So we're basically playing it on 2 tubas, and that's the moment when we're playing it in 3 octaves. 2 octaves lower than it's originally written, because it serves. This is a very opera-like music, you know. It's all about the effect. So we are trying to extend these effects a little bit today and basically tell the story, as he said, that this symphony is basically an opera.
There's one more theme that you hear in the final movement, the underworld movement, which is Dies Irae, or Day of Wrath. It's a Gregorian funeral chant that, up until that moment, was just a revered piece of music. Here it's turned, like the Idée fixe of the Beloved, into a grotesque sounding piece. And then that Dies Irae melody became influential to other romantic composers all the way up to Sergei Rachmaninoff, on into the 20th century. He became obsessed with that Dies Irae melody.
Liszt and Berlioz, they were friends, actually, and Liszt even made a piano transcription of Symphony Fantastique and other pieces of him. So yes, this is the moment when Dies Irae becomes one of these melodies, quoted melodies, and melodies that just need, you just have to, fight, or you just have to face this melody as a composer and write your own thing on it.
Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing this concert tonight, Gregory. Gregory Vajda, resident conductor of the Symphony. I'm John Pitman. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.